All right, so this is your pumper truck. Kind of give us the layout, like what are the major components to this thing for those of folks who aren't familiar?
Sure. So basically everything that you're going to see on a pigging trailer is virtually going to be the same for everybody out there in the industry. You're always going to have an operator's cabin up here. So the operators are going to be working out of this area. What they'll do is they'll control the actual pigging process at that time. They've got pressure indicators, they got flow meters, they've got chart recorders, plus all the dynamics of what's going on with the engine to make sure the engine and the pumps are running efficiently. Moving down the line of the trailer, you're always going to have your recycle tanks. Typically on a pigging operation, you want to minimize how much water you're going to discharge. So you have a recycle tank for any water that's not contaminated by the coke, and then you're also going to have your waste discharge tank. That discharge tank can do two things. It can either run down to the process drain, or you can put it up to a filtration system and recycle that water. And by doing that, you'll basically eliminate your overall consumption 80 to 90% over the entire scope of the project. Going down from the end on the trailer here is basically what you've got is you're going to have your engine set up. So you could have anywhere from one engine up to two engines running anywhere from one pump up to the four. The 8 pump unit that we have out now, or it's going to be out shortly, is hydraulically run through the pumps that way, so it's completely different configuration. But as you can see with this one here, single engine running 2 pumps. You got a split gear case in the center there. It's all gear to gear drive as opposed to any chain drives, just to maximize your efficiency and try and minimize any downtime or outages from any mechanical failure.
Sure. That's a awfully large engine. I mean, any idea what the horsepower on the sucker is?
Well, basically these engines here, you're going to be running anywhere from about 400 horsepower up to 600 horsepower on them, depending on what you need, what ranges, everything like that. We actually find that we're typically kind of overpowered, but we'd sooner have enough than not enough on something like that to be able to operate, like you say, more efficiently and minimize your downtimes.
And for the octo pumper, do you feel like, are you going to have to go up the next size in motor? Or?
No, actually, it's actually operating more efficiently going through hydraulic pumps because you're not losing percentage of your power going through actual physical drive lines and gears. So the actual 8 pump unit has got the same engines as the 4 pump, but it's just basically onto a split gear case running 4 hydraulic pumps off of one engine.
So what was the hardest thing from a design build theory to get to from the 4 to the 8 pumper?
Basically, the biggest thing is to be able to get this thing down the road efficiently, so you've got a weight restraint right from there. Traveling down the roads, you're always going to have a maximum weight that you're allowed to be able to do, plus a distribution on each axle. So a lot of things have evolved into lighter material, typically aluminum as opposed to carbon steel from before. And then the other thing is really getting the hydraulic system in place. Hydraulics have been used for close to 20 years, 25 years in pigging. And one of the issues used to be was overheating. So that's been addressed with newer updated pumps, getting the knowledge of how to compensate for the heating issues, as well as just changing some practices for the pigging itself.
Yeah, I mean, pigging has come a long way since you started. What in your mind is some of the more interesting technologies that have come along on your trucks to enable you to be more efficient from a schedule perspective?
Probably the largest thing that we're able to do within DDT ourselves is the utility of our pig. Our pigs have got interchangeable appendages, so we can basically specify what type of appendage we need to go run into what type of application. If we're running with a very thin hard coke, or if we're running a very hard coke that's 3/4 half-inch thick, we've got appendages that can go basically they look like a hunting arrowhead, and then other ones that look like sandpaper. With that utility, we're able to maximize the cleaning time, but trying to minimize any metal loss or anything like that. That's truly one of the big things about pigging. The whole technology is really not changed over the last 2 decades. So what's coming up behind that is inspection, that type of work, because the new exotic materials for metals, that type of stuff.
One of the things I noticed on here in the back of your truck is the different connections that we have in the back there. Those appear to be spots where you can run your hoses to. Is that something from like a logistics and a setup standpoint that you feel like you've optimized over time, is how you can drive into a site and really get it set up quickly?
Right, yeah. So basically it comes down to the weight distribution as a one factor on that. The other thing is that you always try and maintain your connections on the side of the trailer or even out of the back, because 90% of the time you're backing your trailer up into a little alleyway, or you're along a roadway where you're going to be hooking your hoses up going towards the unit as opposed to coming out on the roadway. So right here on this one here, with this being the quad, we've got all 4 passes coming off the back sides here of the trailer, 2 on this side, 2 on the other side.
And this is the valving that you use to reverse the flow, right? You have the different solenoid valves so you can go forward and backwards at a moment's notice?
That's correct. Yeah, basically what you do is you got your 4 valves. You've got 2 pressure valves that'll assist the direction of where you're pushing the pig. And then you've got your return on the back side. That's from basically hooking up to the heater on your inlet and your outlet of your process lines. There's a dump valve on there also to basically take away any pressure on the system so that you're able to stop those pigs almost instantaneously and be able to change the direction of the water without extreme hammer.
Looks like those blue instruments, those are mag flow meters?
That's correct, yeah. So basically you're always going to watch your flows as well as your pressures to be able to run your pigs. The one thing that DDT does is that we always look and identify the number of tubes that we've got on each pass that we pig, as opposed to timed intervals, because there's too many variables of bypass of the water, wear on the pig, that type of stuff, the type of contamination you have, whether you're going vertical or horizontal even. So we typically always want to identify exactly what tube we're running in, and the flows will give us indicators as to when we're going exactly into a larger diameter. So if we're doing a multiple diameter heater, when the pig falls into a larger diameter tube, your flow rate goes up, your pressures go down, then also through your reading, your indicator, that's a time to be able to turn your pig around. So it's a backup and a complement to be able to work with the other processes to identify what you're doing.
Yeah. Well, so speaking of the multiple diameter heaters, those are relatively rare in the coking industry, but you do come across them. Do you come across any difficulty pigging those heaters versus a quote-unquote regular heater where all the tubes are roughly the same diameter?
One of the things, we do work on cokers that do have multiple diameters. Depending on the run length, sometimes it's difficult to identify whether you're in those 4 or 5 tubes of a larger diameter, or if you're in the other section, if those 4 or 5 tubes are fouled up to give you the same inside diameter as the remainder of the system. So that's where you have to be very careful when you're working with that, to be able to identify exactly where you're at in that system by knowing what tubes you're pigging at, which numbers. Once you get into that larger system, then you're going to see a different readout, and you're able to identify and isolate those 5 and clean them as a separate system, even though they're all tied together.
And I think that's where your strip charting and your instrumentation prove to be the most valuable aspect, right? So the technicians can literally count tubes, and with flow and pressure, with some certainty, all right, I'm in tube 17 or I'm in tube 26, and where the swedge is going to happen, and you can use that to evaluate, as it bounces back and forth between the U-bends, all right, at tube 5, I should see a step change in flow.
Exactly. That's exactly. We've encountered where they do a tube replacement where they've got a schedule change. And when we see that, we'll actually go to our client and ask them, say, listen, we've got an issue here. Is it did they possibly put a sked 80 in instead of a sked 40? We're able to identify that type of stuff, even though we're still running the historical chart papers as opposed to going electronic. It gives us the sensitivity that we want to be able to identify those problem areas, even coming down to the root of a weld in midstream on a pipe with a patch repair. We can read those when we're doing our operation for that.
And you can probably almost feel it, like if there's almost like a speed bump in there, like if somebody left some weld slag on the inside, every time that pig slides by there, boop.
Yep, that's exactly it. That's exactly what could happen. If you run that pig slow enough, which you want to be able to do, you can actually feel that just with the little repercussion coming through the water line right onto your pumping unit, where you will feel that, like you say, a speed bump. And you would think on an 80,000 pound unit, you wouldn't feel it, but you do.
Yeah, I've seen those hoses kick. When you encounter some coke, like the hoses in the ground, they'll kick a little bit. You can hear the engine rev.
Yep, that's exactly it. And that's where we like to be able to run at a lower RPM with our pigs. We maintain a certain path of feet per second that we run the pig with. This way, if we do encounter something that's going to be requiring something more aggressive, we've got that backup to be able to do it. But typically, we run with a softer pig composition with a harder appendage. And with that, we're able to have a little more utility with what we do.
Mm-hmm. So what other aspects of this truck, since we're just kind of scoping out the outside of the truck here, what other aspects of the truck are you most proud of, or do you think people would be interested in seeing? They're not familiar.
Basically, the biggest thing is truly going from, historically a single pass pump going right up to the 4, even now the 8 pass pumping units. You basically reduce the footprint in half going from 2 to 4 pass pumping unit, and you're running half the equipment down the road, which means that we're giving you, the customer, less equipment to have a possible failure when we are running down that road.
Yeah. And I could see where that would be an advantage, especially when you're time crunched and you have a limited amount of time to get a certain number of equipment into the plant and set up, staged for that critical path turnaround activity.
Yeah, because that's one thing we're finding out more and more, is that the windows for turnaround or even just shut down for maintenance, the window is getting shorter and shorter, and they're trying to overlap a lot more work with additional manpower, and with that, real estate becomes a premium.
So I see up here you got a Canada American flag up there, and I notice your accent. So what's the deal with that, eh?
DDT was founded out of Canada back in 1991, so we're truly a cross-border company. We've had a number of licensees throughout Canada and the United States over the last 3 decades, but we've always been proud to be of origin out of Canada and be able to maintain work down here too. It's like I say, we've had numerous licensees through the United States here, and back in 1998, DDT split ways with another company and started venturing out on their own to basically cultivate their own business at that time in the United States.
And if I remember correctly, pigging was, air quotes, invented for the delayed coker application anyways in Canada for a very specific reason.
Right.
My understanding is it's because the nature of the oil sands and the nature of the feeds up there then lend themselves to steam air decoking, which was historically the predominant way of taking the coke out of the tubes.
That is correct.
So there was a distinct need, and folks like DDT and Orland and the team up there in the tar sands came up with this technology now that has saved our industry so much time compared to, the...
Oh, yeah. No, that's exactly it. I remember when it first started this, a buddy of mine was a pipe fitter up in Fort McMurray, and I told him what I'm going to be doing. I said, I'm going to be out there decoking, and he just started laughing. He goes, basically the only thing you're going to come out with clean at the end of the day are the back of your eyeball. Because he didn't know what pigging was. It was all about basically just pulling the plugs and running the pineapples and turbines through there and just getting as dirty as you can. So once I explained this to him and he'd seen what it was, he'd been a pipe fitter already for 20 plus years, and he goes, this is neat stuff. This is going to change a lot of things.
And if I remember correctly, there was a couple other false starts in the development of pigging. I don't know if I remember hearing something about buckshot was tried at one point, or all kinds of other crazy things.
Yeah, there was a number of different technologies. The primary ones were running the turbines, when they would pull the plugs. Then they'd steam air decoke, which is still used today with spalling also. And then there was also, they would basically, I believe the term was sandjet, mini sandjet I've heard over the years, where it was basically like you're sandblasting material on the outside, but you're actually shooting it through the furnace tubes with nitrogen at a specific velocity and a certain hardness of a bead or a pellet down that system. So that was one of the original ways that they were doing it also with those other two. And it's like anything, there's always going to be the pros and cons to everything. Some of it's good for softer material, some of it's great for hard material. So depending on what you're doing, there was a specific application for that. With pigging now, you've got the utility to interchange the hardness of your appendages. You can go right from a nylon head if you're doing fiberglass lines, but if we're doing cokers, you're basically going to be running case hardened steel and carbide, going up to tungsten, that type of stuff. And that's where you've got the utility to be able to change your types of appendages for the aggression that you need to run.
Mm-hmm. Kind of reminds me, I mean, we talk a lot about erosion and damage from online spalling and from pigging to the heater tubes, but I gotta imagine, sandblasting the inside of these tubes probably had its own set of erosion problems.
Yeah, it did, and that's kind of the interesting thing about it is so much of the type of decoke that's out there, you always see metal loss and attrition on the outside of the elbows. Historically, for pigging, anything that I've seen in terms of doing some review of pipes after or anything like that, you get loss on the inside of the elbow because when you've got the pig going around that elbow, it compresses and then it gets tight on that side, and that's where you get the pressure is on the inside of that L on the 180 as opposed to the outside.
And I remember at some point up in Canada, I believe you had a test pigging rig where you probably ran, pigs back and forth 1,000 times. Yep. And then did some testing?
Yeah, that's exactly it. Over the years, they always want to see what they can do, what they can't do with varying types of appendages, certain types of patterns on those. So there's always we've got 2 test loops here in Houston that we run with to be able to help training, or if we need to test something different, that type of stuff. But it's it's a lab environment, so it's not the greatest environment, but it definitely gives you the information that you need to be able to go forward and say, do we need to go this avenue or that avenue and explore something different?